So you were running and you felt a pull in your hamstrings and you knew you were done for the day. It sucks, but I'm gonna show you exactly what you can do to fix this. What's up, Dr. Nick here to explain how to get rid of your hamstring strain. So if you were running recently and you strained your hamstrings, it's common, but we gotta really figure out what we're dealing with. So we gotta focus on what area we are actually addressing, and this is the hamstring area. Now, to understand the hamstrings, they attach at the pelvis and go all the way down into the knee. Now there's three hamstring muscles. There's the semitendinosus, the semimembranosus, and then the biceps femoris that goes to the outside. Most commonly, the most strained one that we are talking about, when we're talking about a hamstring strain or a tear, is the biceps femoris one, which is in the outside of the leg, more to the lateral aspect of the posterior thigh, and it has two heads, but ultimately it goes down to attach to a part in the lower leg, the fibula bone, and that is the one that's primarily being strained when we're dealing with a hamstring strain. It's not to say that the other two muscles can't get strained, but the biceps femoris is the most common one. So that is the area that we're focusing on. So you might be thinking, like, why does this happen when I'm sprinting? Well, there's many factors that play a role into why a strain or a tear happens. But let's go over some of the mechanics of the anatomy of how it functions into sprinting and why this typically happens with running or sprinting. So the hamstrings, like we went over, are in the back of the thigh, but the actions of that is to bring the hip into hip extension backwards, and then also bring the heel to the butt, or knee flexion. So that shortens the hamstring muscles. That's the action of the muscles, of the hamstring muscles. That's the concentric part of the muscles. To now stretch it on max length, you gotta go into hip flexion and then knee extension. That stretches the hamstrings on length, going the opposite way. Now, when we're sprinting, when we're going from a slacked position like this into a max lengthened position with speed, it's not susceptible for that, or it can't tolerate that amount of loading, and then it gets a strain. Now, strains can vary in severity, mild, moderate, or severe, but commonly when we're doing with sprinting, it is gonna be dependent, well, not commonly, it's dependent on the severity of what you're actually dealing with when you're sprinting. Some individuals will experience a mild one or a moderate one. It depends on how hard you're actually going and experiencing this when you're sprinting. But if you understand the concept of why it actually happens, and you want to take those concepts to then on the back end prepare yourself so that you can get back to things like that, that's the main thing. Because if we never put ourselves in a position like this to tolerate load, well then when we just rest and eventually when we feel better and we get back to it, it will happen again. So you want to prepare yourself for that type of movement, for that type of position, to ultimately bulletproof yourself to withstand something like that. So in this video, we're gonna focus on dealing with mild hamstring strains. This isn't gonna be one for a severe strain or a moderate strain or a grade 2 or grade 3. Very mild grade 1 strain. Now, depending on the strain or grade level you're dealing with, there could be pain, swelling, inflammation, and limited range of motion, and hurts when you contract. So with a mild strain that we're dealing with, typically there's gonna be barely any swelling, any discoloration, any bruising, because it's very mild. So it will feel a little bit painful though, and it will hurt with some contractions and probably lengthening the muscles a little bit, and it'll limit the range of motion. So if you're just sitting on a bench like this, and you bring your heel to your butt and you push into a box of some sorts, you'll feel the hamstrings being tensioned and under load. Now, when you have a little bit of a strain, that'll probably hurt a little bit, but it'll still feel strong. It's not like you're gonna push your heel against an object and just be in excruciating pain. It'll feel strong like you push, but it'll still feel a little discomfort or a little bit of pain. And then that's from a contraction standpoint, putting some resistance through that. Also, when you go to straighten your leg, you'll probably feel it being stretched a little bit. It won't feel the most comfortable, but you won't feel like a drastic pain. It'll just feel like, yeah, I feel it in the area that I strained. That will feel like a grade 1. You can go through it, hurts a little bit with length, and it also hurts a little bit of contraction to it. And then also when you put some pressure to it, you'll feel a little bit uncomfortable to it. That's when you know you're dealing with like a grade 1 strain versus the other end of the spectrum, which is grade 3, a severe strain or severe tear, where there'll be discoloration, swelling, very limited range of motion, unable to put any real load or resistance through it, that's when you're dealing with a more severe strain. This video is not gonna be focused on that. We're gonna be focused on the mild one. Now, the first thing that I start with is isometric loading. Isometric loading does not put any force and dynamic movements through the area that's injured, but it starts to build strength and load to the region without putting too much through it. And ultimately, it helps reduce pain and also build some good foundation to then build off of. So let's get into this exercise. So this isometric contraction one that we're gonna be focusing on is gonna be in 3 different ranges of motion to then work on the hamstrings in different ranges of motion. So if I'm lying back like this, my leg's gonna be bent like this in position 1, position 2, and then position 3. And you're gonna perform the same concepts in each position. So from here, I'm just gonna think about pushing my heel down through the ground and then scraping it towards my butt. Now, I'm not gonna be moving because it's the isometric, it's just building tension into it. So from here, I push the heel down and I think of scraping the floor. That will feel the hamstring really kick on. Once you feel that kick on, in isometrics, I like to start with holding this for a period of time. Say, for an example, 10 seconds. After that, I relax, and then I could repeat cycles, say 3 rounds, 5 rounds. But the idea is just to understand the concepts and you go build off of it depending on how you're feeling. So, for an example, some folks might feel like they could only hold it for 2 seconds. They can only hold it for 5 seconds, and they can only do 3 reps. You figure out your baseline so that you could actually progress from. So in this position, I push down, scrape the heel towards my butt, and I feel the hamstrings working. I hold that for 10 seconds, and then I relax. Then I apply that same concept to position 2, and I push down and scrape the heel. Now, the further your leg goes out, the more you'll feel it kick on, and quicker if you're dealing with a strain. It'll kick on sooner. You'll feel the pain sooner when you go more in a lengthened position. Because remember, the hamstring brings the knee into knee flexion. That's slacking it. So when it's strained, as you go to straighten your knee, you're lengthening it more. Then when it's on a length, it can't function as well on length when it's strained. So that's why you'll feel it more. But we have to build up to that capacity in a lengthened position to prepare it. So from here, same concepts. Push down, scrape the floor, feel it kick on, hold it for 10 seconds, and then relax, repeat it 3 rounds. And then the last lengthened position is here. Kick down, scrape the floor, feel it kick on even more. 10-second holds, 3 rounds. The idea is we're working in different ranges of motion of the hamstring to then tolerate it to a more lengthened position. Now notice my hip position. So in the beginning when we went over anatomy and the function of the hamstring, it's on stretch in flexion, hip flexion, and knee extension. That's when it's on stretch. Now to prepare it initially, my hip is really not in hip flexion as much right here, right? So it's in hip flexion a little bit here, but it's slacked at my knee. And then as you go down, you're stretching it at the knee, but you're slacking at the hip, right? My hip's in hip flexion here, hip extension there. And we're working on this. Now, when you start to build isometrics in these 3 different ranges of motion, and you could build up where it's not feeling pain anymore, you know you could progress off of this position. So for an example, say all of that was easy to do, wasn't feeling it anymore, you could then, for an example, progress yourself up into this type of position. Now look at my chest angle and look at my leg. That looks like a sprinting position if I were to stand like this and I'm coming forward. That is lengthening it. The idea isn't to start here, it's to build up to here with those concepts. So from here, if I'm sitting up nice and tall, I don't want to start here and perform isometrics. I want to start here because now my hamstring muscles are shortened at my knee but stretched at my hip. So we're working in the safe range of motion. You apply the concepts of isometrics. So from here, I'm gonna push down and scrape the heel towards my butt, feeling my hamstrings working. Same idea, hold it for 10 seconds, relax, repeat 3 rounds. Once I get good in this position, I go to this position. I straighten my knee a little bit more. I'm getting a more length of my hamstrings. I stay here, push down, scrape the floor, feel it working, hold for 10 seconds, and then relax, 3 rounds. And then the last round is here. Same concept. Push down, scrape the floor, feel it work in my hamstrings. 10-second holds, 3 rounds. So you apply the concept in this range of motion, lengthened, this range of motion, and this range of motion. After you get comfortable doing the one on your back. It's the concepts to understand here of how you apply isometrics to a more shortened position of the hamstrings and a more lengthened position of the hamstrings. Once you build isometrics to these regions, then you can start to progress to higher level stuff. But hopefully understanding the concepts of how it applies to what the leg is going to be getting exposed to, such as in sprinting. Now we also want to dynamically stretch the hamstrings, but we want to stretch it where we can activate the quads, which plays into reciprocal inhibition of the opposite side, or the hamstrings. So with this stretch, we're going to be on our back like this. We could grab the leg. So now, using our anatomy from the beginning, we're stretching it now in hip flexion. Now from here, I'm gonna straighten my leg until I start to feel that pulling sensation where it's tolerable, and then I'm gonna hold it for say 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Duration can vary, but the idea is I'm activating my quads, which reciprocally inhibits my hamstring muscles, i.e. decreases the activity level to this, and then I come back. Now it's twofold here. I'm activating the quads, which relaxes the hamstrings, but I'm also putting the hamstrings under a dynamic stretch, and it's very low level. I'm just kicking my leg up, and I'm getting a stretch stimulus or stimulation to the hamstring region. So I kick out, I feel that stretching, I would feel that area being pulled a little bit, but it's tolerable. Hold it for a little bit, 5-10 seconds, and then come back. And you could repeat with this. Usually I like more time under tension, so if I'm holding it for 10 seconds, I'll do about 2 rounds. You get 2 minutes, and that is enough of input to that region to make some change into a lengthened position. Because we don't want to just sit and do nothing, and then when we start to move, we feel all stiff again. We want to keep yourself moving, but in a safe range. So from here, again, I kick, hold 10 seconds, feeling that being stretched and pulled, and then come back down. Now the idea is you don't want to just push yourself through something. You want to push to the point where you feel like it's going. So if it's here and this is intolerable, then you could do 2 things. One, just lower your leg down, it'll feel a lot better, or just don't kick as high. Go up to the point where you feel like it's okay, and then come back, and now you know your baseline to then progress from. Remember, more in knee flexion, more in hip flexion, the more stretch you'll feel. Less in hip flexion, the less stretch you'll feel, because you're out of a range of motion. So you want to play within your ranges of motion to then dynamically stretch the hamstrings. So now progressing load to the hamstrings using some eccentrics. Now this isn't a day 1 after hamstring strain exercise. This is more in the later phases of recovering from the hamstring strain. Now mild, you can start this pretty soon, but not day 1. But as the week goes on, or 2 weeks out, you can start to incorporate very low level eccentrics to put load through this, to then beef it up, to then tolerate a positioning. So from here, I just have a band attached to my ankle, and what the band is trying to do, the band force is this way, so it's trying to pull my leg like this. But with eccentrics, we want to put the hamstring using load under length, so that next time it gets into that position, i.e. when running or sprinting, it could actually tolerate that. So from here, I'm sitting up nice and tall. It's twofold of a contraction because I'm gonna be bringing my heel to my butt, which concentrically works the hamstrings. I get that in a shortened position. Then from here, it wants to pull me this way, but I'm gonna let it win very slow because that's putting eccentric load through the hamstrings, and I feel that working. And then I kick back and I repeat this. With eccentrics, I like to build up about 12 to 15 reps, and then you build up with load. So from here, you could start eccentrics with a very low level load to then lower the intensity to this region and not just go so high where it can then just strain even more. So if you're dealing with a strain, you can go very low level eccentrics to then build up on top of. So this could be a very light band, and as this gets easy, then you could progress higher. And then with this, we're not even introducing speed where it would look something like this, where we're trying to catch and tolerate it under more load, but the idea is just to get low-level eccentrics in this video, in this concept. So from here, I'm letting the band win, I'm feeling it working, and then I curl back. Feeling it working. The idea is to let it go slow and then curl back. And you'll be feeling this working. This should feel like a good work versus a sharp discomfort work throughout this. And it's the concepts to understand of how to build on these things and not just do this day one because it looks fun to do. You want to build up to something like this, and the concept is to get yourself prepared to withstand that load so that the next time your leg gets in the position, it doesn't strain again. So I hope this video gave you some insight on how to actually go about dealing with a hamstring strain. We took it from isometric loading to dynamically stretching and putting some low-level eccentrics through it. Now, to understand the concepts throughout this video, it's the understanding of how to build off of some of the demonstrated exercises in here. These are not the end all be all. There's definitely some more progressions to this, but hopefully this gave you some insight on things that you could start to do to put some low level load to the region from an isometric standpoint, some dynamic stretches, and then some eccentric load to ultimately prepare it to help you get in the position of a sprinting position. Because remember, we're always gonna regret the position that we don't train into the injured position, okay? So when we get ourselves in a position of an injury, we're always regretting that we're not strong enough to withstand that. So the idea isn't to just avoid that position. It's let's get yourself prepared for that position. And this concept applies to the entire body. So hopefully, again, this video gave you some insight and helpful tips. And if you did find value in this video, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe down to the channel, leave any comments down below. Let me know if this video was helpful, if you learned some things, and let me know if you want any more videos on this particular concept or additional ones. And I would really appreciate that. So until next time, this is Dr. Nick.